Hey YouTube, Matt here. Welcome back to the channel. In today's art-related video, I want to demonstrate what you can do with 3D prisms and how you can turn those prisms into everyday objects. I'm going to show you how you can carve out the form from those prisms to depict what you are trying to depict. Anything at all, actually. And I'm going to show you right now. So let's jump into it, and let's start by drawing a cube. Just a basic cube in three-dimensional space. Again, on a 2D surface, because art is the illusion of three-dimensionality on a 2D plane. And I'm not using guidelines, I'm not using perspective. According to its rules, if I was using a ruler and a horizon line, vanishing points, which I've demonstrated in a prior video, it's good practice to do that, of course. But at the same time, if you're creating a very complex scene and you've got a lot of like little objects around, you might not want to spend all that extra time using a ruler. So you can depict 3D objects with enough practice. You can train yourself to be able to draw them with a reasonable degree of accuracy. Okay, so that's not too bad. That's a cube. Let's draw some cylinders. Draw a lengthier cylinder here. I always mark off the center because you can use it to map out spacing and smaller surface details. I'm going to draw through this cube here too, just to show you that it's actually three-dimensional. It's a little easier to understand what's happening there. How about even... So now this cylinder is being tilted upwards. So now it's like you took it and you tilted it so you can see the top face a little more. You could do the same thing with this lengthier one too. You'd see more of the front face, and then the side edges would converge, and the back face would be smaller. That rounded edge of the back face would be smaller because we're tilting it towards the camera. This is turning towards the camera. This is basically looking almost straight on because we can only see a slight amount of this face right here. You can see more of this face right here because it's being tilted back. And if, let's say a cube, we're looking at a cube straight on, and it was tilted slightly downwards, then you'd see just a little bit of that top face. And we're actually quite close up to it because you can see that the severity of the angles of these edges, the vanishing points, like right here. And again, with that same cube, if you were to tilt it upwards, again, looking straight on, tilted upwards slightly, you'd only see a little bit of that bottom face. Okay. With a sphere, I mean, it's a ball, so you can rotate it any which way and you're going to see the same thing. All right, you guys have seen me draw plenty of these prisms before, but let's turn one of them into, or a bunch of them rather, we can turn a bunch of them into familiar objects we see all around us. So one thing I really wanted to draw today was a wedge of cheese. A wedge of cheese. It just looks cool and it's fun to draw because, I don't know, it's just kind of fun. So let's start with a rectangular prism. I was thinking maybe a wedge of Swiss cheese because it has such a distinct look to it. All right, so I'm gonna draw right through this. And you know, as you can see, I'm not using a ruler. I'm doing this straight from my imagination. This is excellent practice. especially when you've got an eye. And again, that's kind of going to come when you have done this a lot, when you've just tried to draw without the guidelines. Guidelines are excellent for beginners, and I'd recommend it for almost everything you do in perspective. But until you're able to really see, when you know what looks right, as they say, you can get away with a lot in drawing. You can get away with doing a lot of things outside of the conventions of the rules, but you have to know the rules first. You can't really break them, and you can't really break the rules of perspective either. It's going to simply look wrong. Okay, so now we've got what is a fairly accurately depicted rectangular prism. Now I want to carve away at this and turn it into a wedge of, let's say, Swiss cheese. So I'm going to take this point, this vertex, connect it to this one, take this one, connect it down to this one, and now you can start to see the formation of this kind of, again, it's a triangular prism of sorts. It's not exactly a wedge that's been cut away from a wheel, but it does look like a nice, see, it's not a perfect wedge from a wheel unless that wheel was cut irregularly. So what you could do is just, you could fix it up a little bit. Maybe have it. Now this is looking more, and again, I can see this in my mind, so it's a little bit easier to make these fixes. I might be a little bit extreme here. Okay. And again, like, consider the fact that you might not have cut a perfect wedge out of a wheel. If this was to be the center, so it would be more like, and you can see as I make these changes, it's fixing it up a little bit. It's correcting it slightly so it looks more accurate. So that's a little more accurate as a wedge. Now, the thing to do to actually create this wedge completely accurate is to draw the actual wedge wheel, or sorry, the wheel of cheese, and then take that wedge from that wheel. So how would you do that? Again, it's a cylinder. A wheel of cheese is a cylinder. It's basically the same shape as a tire wheel, even. I might be a little bit. So it's kind of like an ovular shape, almost an egg shape. And again, draw that center ellipse just so that you have a center mark that you can use to carve away your wheel wedges from. Mark the center of this center line within that ellipse, and then you can carve away the different sections, the different wedge sections. Actually, this would curve around the surface of the wheel, just like that. So you can see there are a lot of lines that go into the construction of these objects. All you have to do is erase the construction lines that you don't want to keep. And this is also really nice because when you start to ink your finished work, you'll know where to put the ink exactly. So you have one nice clean looking line that creates an accurate depiction of what you're trying to represent. We can imagine if that wedge was taken away, you'd see into it a little bit like this. So let's say maybe the light source is coming this way. This part would be shadowed here, and this wedge is, or this section is where the wedge would be. And of course the wedge, if we take it out and have it here, the ellipse. Sorry, we're going to have it curve slightly because it's not perfectly cut straight out. Actually, it's cut straight out, but perspective has the angle of the the curvature is going to be apparent on these edges here. Okay. So we've just removed this wheel wedge from the wheel, the cheese wheel. All right, you can see that the wedge is going to, again, it's going to have that curvature around it because it's following the curvature of the ellipse that goes all around the object. So this, going back to this initial wedge I drew, that curvature is going to exist. It's not going to exist as extreme because it's only a slight section out of the wheel, depending on how big the wheel is. These are all the things you have to think about when you're trying to depict these objects to make them look accurate according to what we see in our everyday experience. I mean, you could do the same thing with a pie. It's going to be less of a, not as thick of a cylinder, and then, you know, slice through it nicely. You can see here there's a nice slice of the pie right here, and if we cut right through it, see, now I can keep the greater amount of pie that's left, or I can keep the slice that I took, get rid of the rest, and I've drawn now a very accurate slice of that pie. And now I can add all the surface details. I can put it on a plate. I can have this pie sitting on a plate. And I can, you know, add the crust, add some detail, textural detail. You know, the pie is inside the crust here. Maybe it's like a cherry pie and it's spilling out a little bit onto the plate. And again, this is a perfect example of having these guidelines that you can use to ink very cleanly and accurately. And again, you always want to draw through everything with the pencil for the sake of accuracy, because when you go to ink, then you make very careful decisions where you want to put the lines. So let's see, I want to blow this up just so you can see. And again, now I'm going to kind of cheat and use just my mind's eye to depict what we drew here a little bit bigger so you can see what that pie slice might look like. There you've got the crust. And when I say drawing through, so maybe some of the cherry filling is spilling out over the edge of the crust here. So you'd have the cherries coming over the crust, and I've drawn the cherries right over the crust, but when I go to ink, I won't, I mean, I could erase now, but it's always best to erase after you've inked everything nicely and you have nice clean ink line work left over. I'm going to make a video on inking coming up. I think it's important to get into that because inking is a great way to finish off your pencil art. Drawing some crust here. Got those some textural details. And it's never, it's never a perfect line. It's always going to be a little bit off. Food is never perfect, even though it carries on these shapes that mimic the prisms we've spent some time drawing today here. You might have some crumbs. This is another great thing about drawing is it kind of forces you to think. If you want to create a really nice, accurate looking representation of what you're trying to draw, you're going to think about all these details to bring out the realism of what you're trying to depict. And again, it's, when the pie is taken out, the slice is taken out, it's never perfect. It might crumble, might come apart a little bit. And that is perfectly okay. It's okay to draw food that isn't perfect because it's never perfect. But it's nice to look at and nice to eat, of course. So, yeah, you can see we've got a slice of pie here. Let's see, what can we do with this cylinder? I mean, we could turn this into a pencil It's quite thick here. Maybe it's one of those thicker. I remember when I was in kindergarten, they had those large red pencils. For some reason, they were just massive. So let's see if we draw through this here. You can extend it for the end that's been sharpened. So let's mark off the center here. Carry that vertex to these edges. Decide how far back we want the graphite to show. And then you can see a pencil is actually a hexagon. It's hexagonal in shape. It's got 6 sides to it. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 around. So you might mark off, again, mark the center here. Mark off 6 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you can carry those back and depict. And then you can kind of round off. Those big pencils didn't have erasers, just like this one. This pencil it's an excellent pencil for art. A lot of you'll find that a lot of the art pencils, especially in varying gradients, they don't have erasers on the end. Those pink erasers are really not the greatest, those gum style erasers. You want to use something like a plastic eraser. This is the same eraser I'm using here. This is excellent because it doesn't crumble the little pieces. It kind of binds up, and it's easy to, it pulls it off the page very nicely, and it's easy to clean up. So I'll make a video separately on erasers, but Staedtler, Mars Plastic, go for the plastic erasers. They are fantastic. I'm not being sponsored by Staedtler by any means, but I can't recommend these types of erasers enough. And they're pretty cheap too. Just great drawing tools to have at your disposal. All right, so we might extend this back a little bit. Accuracy is key when you're drawing things, especially from your imagination. You want it to look believable. You want it to look real. I want to go back to this wedge. Let's turn this into some Swiss cheese. So let's draw some. And again, Swiss cheese is nowhere near perfect, especially the way the holes are showcased. You might have a hole here. Let's erase that interior. See, it might be kind of off a little bit there. You might see a little bit of this face on the inside. Holes of varying sizes, sections that are just simply missing because of the holes. And then yeah, you might see a bit of the shadow there. And again, because it's sitting on the ground, you can, adding some textural lines on the ground around it can help it look as if it's sitting on a surface of some kind, whether it's a table or a plate or anything. It just helps to situate it. This is, it goes a little bit beyond just shadow. It is shadow, but it's also helping to depict the illusion that it's sitting, it's resting on something, that there's weight to it. You want to create the illusion of not only it looking three-dimensional, but it having weight, the object possessing weight while it adheres to its form. All right, so it's looking a little more like cheese. It's not perfect, but it's definitely something. All right, so thank you for checking out this video, guys. I hope you got something out of it. I'm going to go back to this particular type of practice, just building objects out of prisms, carving away shapes so that you can turn them into everyday objects that we come into contact with. It will help your drawing game immensely by practicing doing this. And I'm going to go back to perspective so that you can get an idea of how to accurately depict objects in with 2-point perspective, 3-point, and we'll go all the way up to 6-point. Gets a little bit crazy at 6-point. It's more of like a fisheye lens effect, but that's something to discuss the next time. So thank you for checking this video out. If you've stayed this long, I absolutely can't thank you enough. And if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, giving the video a like, and I'm always happy to read your comments. If you've got anything you want to even criticize, I welcome it all. come at me and let's have a chat. All right. Thank you guys. You guys have a great one. Take care.